Welcome to the Made for Agriculture podcast.
All right. Well, hello. Welcome to another episode of the MFA Made for Agriculture podcast. I'm your host, Landry Jones. Today is July 17th, 2026, and we are bringing you kind of a crop update from our staff agronomist. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott and get this thing kicked off.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Send my last text there before we get going. Yeah, like Landry said, the 17th of July, 7 in the morning. Kind of enjoying the little bit of cool weather, I guess, before we get into another hot one. Definitely July in Missouri all of a sudden. Kind of spoiled throughout this spring, but kind of saw the first corn rolling this past week. In my travels, nothing terribly extreme in most places, but kind of nice to only see that for the first time, almost like I say, the middle of July. But we're definitely summer in Missouri, so we're just gonna kind of kick it around, talk about the crops that we're seeing. We also had our training camp event this past week. Brought in several hundred folks from MFA to Central Missouri, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we did through that. But I'd say, Craig, if you want to kind of get us started and maybe what you're seeing up there with corn, and we'll just kind of go around the horn.
Yeah, appreciate that. A lot of our corn up north here, it's tasseled now. We've still got a few fields that are maybe about a week out, but most of our corn would range from about tassel to kind of that early blister stage, R2. A lot of fungicide applications kind of starting to roll out. So we've got been seeing some disease pressure. We've been pretty hot, like Scott's mentioned, and it's been fairly dry. We haven't had a whole lot of rain here in the last couple weeks to really just develop that disease pressure, but we are seeing some tar spot. We're seeing, the usual suspects, the gray leaf spot, northern cornleaf blight, and I guess the bigger news this week, we are starting to see some southern rust move into the area up here, both on the eastern and western side of the state. So that being said, I mean, the infection's there, the host is there. It's just going to be a matter of, how the environmental conditions play out. But I mean, just, as we continue on, that fungicide application is going to help to protect that plant throughout these critical stages of grain fill. So, I think we're supposed to maybe start to cool off a little bit middle of next week. If we catch some rain in that, I mean, you're going to see some of these diseases start to progress. But soybeans, we're looking at reproductive stages. Most of the beans now are R2 to R4 or 5, some of the earliest ones. We're seeing some increased insect pressure. I've looked at a couple fields yesterday that are showing some pretty good defoliation from Japanese beetles, actually, and kind of pushing the thresholds there for applications over in kind of the central part of retail north. I know one of our consultants over east, Megan Adkins, she'd mentioned she was finding some deck day stem borer, the beetles, actually. So definitely going to be something to keep an eye out for. We're not so much concerned about the beetles, but the larvae, can have a pretty big impact on standability of some of those soybeans and stuff later. So, it's kind of some of
Was she find them in places that have had them in the past, or did it seem like new areas?
I still need to kind of touch base with her on that, but I would assume we've got, especially over in that part of the world, there's a lot of soybean, bean on bean fields. Their crop rotation isn't always necessarily, corn and soybeans every year. I would venture to guess you're probably seeing some heavier pressure in the fields that didn't get rotated from last year.
Right.
For sure.
We've seen some of that, just kind of the fields that have them. That's where you, not every year, but that's where you seem to have more of an issue. Of course, anything pretty much in the sunflower family also is a host. ragweeds, cockleburrs. I think one of the first fields I ever found it in pretty bad had a cockleburr issue, so felt like that was kind of part of the bridge getting them into the soybean crop. You brought up southern rust. My folks down here in Central are also starting to find it, but it was kind of interesting. I always watch the maps, tar spot, southern rust, red crown rot. We're always watching for insect pressure coming from the south. The rusts in particular, though, they, in basically all of our crops, the rusts all have to overwinter further south and blow up here. Prior to, the discovery in Missouri, which I'm going to kick this over to Rocky for a second, it was one of the guys on his team that found it. It was down in southern Texas. You didn't see anything in Arkansas, Kansas, Oklahoma, and all of a sudden it shows up around Adrian, Missouri. So I'll say, Rocky, if you want to kind of take over for that.
Yeah. Pretty surprising to see that stuff move up that quickly, and then kind of as broad of an area as it covered without a storm cell carrying it up here. Normally, we're not going to see southern rust without some severe weather bringing it up, or at least multiple days of strong winds. But yeah, the scout there around Adrian, Sam, he's been seeing it roughly 25% of the fields. The fields that are treated with fungicide are obviously doing good, but he's got corn that's ranging from anywhere, blister to almost dent. So, some of that corn's pretty well past the worst of it, and we'll be fine either way. But there's definitely going to be some acres that are going to have some potential for loss that we're going to have to protect, because that stuff can move pretty quick. We haven't been seeing it really blow up like I've seen it do in the past. But like Craig said, we've got the spores, we've got the host. We're just waiting for somebody to light the fire here, and that stuff to really pop. But it's one of those diseases that's always catches everybody's attention, because you cannot walk through a field without coming out looking like an Oompa Loompa when it gets bad. It's
well, and it's not the middle of August either. It's only the middle of July.
Yeah.
And, you get over into particularly the central to eastern, part of my territory, particularly the eastern. We've got some corn that only went in the ground, a month ago. So there's an opportunity, definitely, like you say, you've got the host, and not only do you have a host, you have a very susceptible host. You get the wrong environment. So definitely something to keep an eye on. What about
Scott?
beans down your way, Rock?
Hey,
Go
Scott.
ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you there. You talked about the reporting maps and some of that stuff that's out there, and it not being maybe showing up. Maybe it's either not showing up or it's not getting reported. In our neighbors between here and where it was originally reported in the Texas area. Is that something that you feel like is just a reporting error? People aren't noticing it, or is it the sheer fact that potential disease made it that far, and we were just happened to be in the ground, we're on the ground so much with our folks that we just maybe caught it before anybody in southeast Kansas, northeast Oklahoma, some of that area caught it?
Well, there's a handful of people in the state that if they're looking for these kind of things and it's out there at all, they're going to find it. And
Okay.
Sam is definitely one of those guys. So I did wonder if that was kind of part of it. I mean, he obviously does a very good job, very thorough. And, the other side of it too, he sent a picture of that was just nasty. And I mean, the picture alone, we assumed that we had a problem, but we still went through before we just jumped the gun, we sent it to actually Dr. Bradley was having his field day in Columbia, and so I asked Sam to bring a sample with him, and he got it to Pong over at the lab, and they looked at it, and I'm not sure where Dr. Tian sent it on to from there, but he wanted to even confirm it further and sent it off for I forget what he called it, basically like DNA sequencing, or just to really confirm it. So that was a lot of hoops to, I guess, jump through to just really make sure we had it right. I mean, I've seen common rust be really nasty before, where you suspected southern and it ended up not being. So where the map looked the way it was, I think we all felt like we needed to really make sure we had it right. As soon as we had that, now here more pictures started coming in, and on those, I think some of them are still, some of them are going to the lab. I know they are. They've offered to do some free testing just for confirmations. But as far as why maybe not being seen in other places, I don't know. One suspicion I may have, I mean, particularly in northern Missouri, it's not an every year thing. If you're in an area where it kind of is an every year thing, at some point folks stop, probably having to send them in to,
Right.
To do the confirmations and all that. I know we've seen that with tar spot. I mean, it's tar spot. We know it's tar spot, and that I suspect that that's part of it. But I am surprised, because the map's starting to fill in a little bit. You've got some in Mississippi, you've got some in Arkansas, multiple counties in Missouri. Texas has crept north, but still, at least on it this morning, there's nothing in Kansas, nothing in Oklahoma. So I don't have a great answer, but I had a long non-answer for you there, I guess.
No, that's all right. It's all right.
But yeah, those maps are so helpful. Guys are planting corn in Texas and Florida in January. That's a pretty good head start for disease and bugs outlook for us. So I think, yeah, if everybody reported, we'd probably have seen the progression a lot more steadily. But we don't have a gray leaf map or a yellow and corn map.
Sure.
It's just, so I can definitely see what Scott's saying about if you're an agronomist from Mississippi, it's like, oh yeah, well, just rust again. So
Well, and I don't know what it takes to get on the map. I don't know if that's something that's state by state. We're coming off the 4th of July holiday, and that kind of made it a long weekend, and I thought maybe that was slowing some of that up. But at least here in Missouri, we haven't done it this way with southern rust, just because the pictures can be fairly deceiving. But I mean, Dr. Bish has been really good to work with. For example, on tar spot, if somebody has experience with it and has seen it and sent leaves in before to have them confirmed, a good high quality picture from one of those people that's like I said, been able to find it in the past and have some experience with her. She'll post it that way. I mean, it's not like they're, oh my, before we put anything on the map, we have to have a sample from everything. I think in most cases that's how it would work, but on at least some of this stuff. So, yeah, I would like to see people report it more so we could see that progression, because they are very helpful to, I get the alerts from the University of Missouri, but I also get them from Kansas. I also get them from Oklahoma. There's probably other places I should subscribe to, but they're helpful to at least put things on your radar and expect to see them coming. One of my folks in the kind of the southern part of my territory started finding fall armyworm, last week. That's not something we have a map for, but it sure is nice to know that it's on its, they're on their way up this direction. Any of those heads ups, it's kind of lets you know what you need to look for.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
What's the bean situation like your way, Rocky?
So I mean, our early beans are, we're R4, approaching R5, but double crops planters are still rolling. Some of that later first crop ground, still we're getting first crop beans in July. But mostly foliage feeding insects at this time. There's not really any disease progression that I can see in the beans. They're really clean, doing well. I don't think we've had a report that's been above threshold for any foliage feeding, but it's the usual suspects. There are Japanese beetles, blister beetles, the blister beetles just started coming in this week, and
Mhm.
they're easy to catch your eye because they really gang up on a plant. You're just walking through there and it looks like a massacre. But that's really all that we've seen. Got a lot of fungicides going down, a lot of sweep nets, working their canopies, but just really not seeing a whole lot. They're chugging along nicely.
You may have just said this and I missed it. Stink bugs, are you seeing many yet? in the
Yeah.
soybeans?
So stink bugs were still we may get one or two, per 10 sweeps, but generally speaking, they haven't been an issue, and it's mostly been greens, not as many browns that I've seen,
Mhm.
which are a little more difficult to control. But yeah, we're definitely going to be keeping an eye out for stink bugs, and I am surprised we haven't seen any podworms yet. We've got a lot of susceptible beans out there. They are just ripe for the chewing. So definitely going to keep an eye out on those, as we move through this summer.
I've got
Tell you what-
another
Go ahead.
question for you guys. Sorry, not being obviously as well in depth as you all. I was at the MU crop conference there, a couple weeks ago up there in Columbia at Bradford, and one of the stops was on stink bugs. And I guess my question, I was actually sitting next to Sam there and to get his input, but again, just not having that row crop background, my mind maybe went a little different direction than some of the other guys sitting there listening to him talk. But my question was, they had the charts that on the stink bugs that showed a little bit of a peak in the population, but didn't quite meet the threshold. And then it kind of dropped back off and then had a later peak. And they were talking about insecticide timing and putting that in with maybe a fungicide at the R2 stage or something like that. And essentially they were saying that there was a late peak in that the stink bug populations, that the insecticide with a fungicide pass may not have caught that second peak, if that makes sense. My question to Sam, and I guess I'll throw this to you guys, is even though we maybe didn't reach that peak threshold of stink bugs early in the season, if we were to put a insecticide on with our fungicide, knowing that we were close to that threshold, would that have kept that second wave of population increase down? Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining that right. I'm just not super familiar with the stink bug population and how they, ebb and flow as the season goes on. But that was
Well, they're
one thing
also
I
very
thought they didn't
mobile.
talk about that, and I thought, well, if you were that, if your threshold was 10 and you were at 9 or 8 and you didn't do anything about it, I could see that there would potentially be more bugs later in the season. But if you knock that population down to 0 during that time frame that you could apply, you would be applying an insecticide during your fungicide pass, would that second wave not have been above the critical threshold and done damage to the plants, I guess is my question. Anyone?
I'll wait for Scott.
I've got thoughts. I was gonna give everybody a chance.
And not to go down a rabbit hole here, because I know we got.
Well, I mean, part of it becomes, so there's a few things at play. I guess one thing, stink bugs are very mobile.
and that's what Sam was saying.
Yeah, they're very mobile, and as Rocky kind of alluded to, they can be tough to kill. So, I got called out to went and looked with a grower I've worked with for ages now, to look at some corn of his a few years back, and it was a large cornfield. I mean, I think 100, 200 acres. His dad was posting it, and he had an insecticide, just a pyrethroid insecticide in there. Ran short on it in one area, had like 20 acres to go, whatever it was, 15, 20 acres, and ran out of the insecticide, but rain's coming, wanted to get the herbicide on, so went ahead and just sprayed it. And anyway, in that area, every single plant was affected by stink bug. It basically was like, you crowd them in from all around there. Didn't kill them, but they didn't like how they felt. And I'd never seen anything like it. We see a lot of stink bug in corn. Looks like chemical damage. That's why I get called to it sometimes, because it's like, well, we got chemical damage. And I'm like, well, it basically is chemical damage. When when they start working on a plant, they actually have digestive enzymes they'll inject into the plant to kind of start to pre-digest it before they even suck it back in. And boy, it does some weird things to plants. I mean, you'll see a lot of tillarine, suckers, just some really, really odd growth. And like I said, in this case, they basically corralled them all into one little area. And I mean, every single plant was affected a lot. So, when I appreciate their thresholds, and I think they're definitely something we need to look at. But, if you're out spraying your beans and, like I say, somebody else is going out there with a low rate, a lambda or something like that, it's not necessarily killing those things. It could be driving them off and so who knows what it's going to look like the following week. The other side of that, I know some of the companies we work with. So when we're talking about stink bugs, we're generally moving on past just the pyrethroids, and we're starting to look at the combo products that have a neonic in them. So you're looking at, like a Leverage 360 or a, it's escaping me, boys. Syngenta's product, Indigo. Thank you. Which is, I'll get some phone calls for that lapse probably. But the products that have the pyrethroid, have the neonic, going to do much better job on that. I know they are doing some work, because the practical time it's going to be applied is that, that late R2, R3, early R4. We're making a pass through there. We're doing fungicide. We're wanting to protect the plant, because you're going to have that greening effect. Those beans are going to be the healthiest beans in the neighborhood, and that's where the insects get drawn to. So we're protecting them from that. Also, the other things that are already going on there, we're taking care of, like you said, stink bugs if we're adding that kind of a product. But they are looking at doing an even later application and seeing benefits from it. Now, how practical that is going forward, I mean, you're going to have to really see a return and see a consistent return. As Rocky alluded to, we also start worrying about podworms at that point, and we don't necessarily have the best stuff in the tank at that point for podworms. If we're going in with one of those products, we still need to probably have that Prevathon type product added to it, which some of that is being done as well. So the insect situation has gotten much more complicated over the last few years as we start dealing with a little bit of resistance. We start addressing some things that have already been out there. Stink bugs are not new. They're just, we're finally kind of starting to deal with them and address them a little bit. So you guys, go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, I haven't been in this agricultural world for a super long time, just a little over 10 years, but we saw the neonics just 1 year we went from spraying everything with Leverage 360 and controlling podworms, stink bugs, I mean everything under the sun, to the next year we couldn't control a podworm with any pyrethroid, and no amount of neonics would make a difference. We had guys making their own and just imidacloprid mixes with some bifenthrin or something like that, trying to make their own tank mix generics, and they're running for some pretty high rates and still not seeing control. So I as soon as we got products like Elevest, Banacor, those diamide products, oh my gosh, talk about a game changer on worms. Yes, on worms, it lights out. But it didn't take us very long in the conversation to say, well, what about hard shells? When we're talking about these new products, and yeah, you're back to relying strictly on a pyrethroid in that tank mix with your diamides. So if it's really prescriptive anymore on the insect front for what what you're going to target, because you're not going to usually put both in the tank. But I think we're going to be getting to a point where we may be running 2 or 3 ingredients to control some insects here before very long.
And it's not $3 either.
No heavens, no. Yeah, diamides are pricey.
Yeah. No, scouting, knowing what you have out there, doing some trials, seeing what your return is. I think, but to circle back to your original question, Landry, I think there is interest in looking at at trying to hit that peak. Whether or not there'll be enough to, from a practical standpoint of making another pass through beans. I mean, in some cases, feels like guys made about 7 passes through for herbicides, and you've done your fungicide, insecticide. There's probably a little bit of fatigue at that point of crossing through and spending more money. But if the return's there, I mean, guys are pretty responsive to that. I mean, if you can show them the return.
Sure.
You also have a lot of nymphs and everything out there at that point in time. I mean, the nymph to adult ratio sometimes is pretty staggering, and that starts. I've always wondered when we see them in beans as heavy as we do, a lot of times even right at harvest, how much that's contributing to what we see in corn the following year. They'll overwinter a lot of times. You'll see them come out of the trees and that kind of thing, but they had to get a start somewhere. And it's incredible how many, you see dozens on one plant sometimes of just the nymphs. So Garrett, we didn't forget about you, buddy.
No, I know it. We're making up the last few weeks. We've been making up for the lack of rainfall we've had, and so it's been extremely wet here. The corn, you guys talked about southern rust. We seen a little bit here too, but it kind of all hit us at the same time instead of here than there. But we've just seen a little bit. The corn's, moving along. It's R2 to R5. We're going to be at black layer in a couple weeks. And other than that, there's not too much going on in the corn game. Soybeans, R5.5. The frog eye's gotten pretty severe in places, the places it was, Cody tells me where there was top, it's been holding it off. Seeing some target spot, some sudden death, that's been heavy in places. No podworms yet. The wheat beans are, spraying herbicides right now on those. You want to move on to other crops or stay there? Or...
No, yeah, just kind of what else is going on. But yeah, it's kind of ran into Cody at our training camp event, and he was telling us about the seeing quite a bit of frog eye.
Yeah.
We always kind of talk about it, but I mean, with the exception of having a couple varieties that were weak on it a few years back, we don't see a lot.
Yeah.
But it seems like it's pretty consistent for you all every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and tell us about everything else.
The cotton, with all this rain and stuff, it's kind of put us behind on, our plant growth regulators. They had a lot of guys had an option to go, you could have gone to the plane, but really didn't want to spend that money on the plane doing that plant growth regulator shot. Wanted to get it with the ground rig, and then it's just kind of kept raining, and so they're going to be hammering picks on cotton over the next 3 weeks, just trying to get it slowed down. It's really hard to slow it down once it takes off. So we'll probably see some internode length long in the plant in the spot at the end of the season. But if all this weather had happened, a few weeks from now, we would have shed a lot of fruit because of it. So, but being now, it's okay. We'll get the vegetative growth slowed down a little bit and hopefully still make a good crop.
You talk about the internode length. Is that a worry about lodging, or is that just that you're putting energy towards the wrong
just
thing?
too much into fruit. Yeah, or too much into vegetative growth and not fruit. Mm-hmm. The rice is starting to head out. It's watering is a big deal right now because it uses a lot of water, when it's heading out like that. Plus, the evaporation increases with the heat in the summer, so you really are keeping the water on it. And then they've been, fungiciding the varieties that are susceptible to smut. So, other than that, I'd say that wraps up the boot heel situation right now.
Oh, you mentioned the weather. I hadn't looked at the drought map for a little while, pulled it up, and yeah, you all are pretty mild right now. I mean, the boot's still, the extreme southern end, moderate drought, it's saying, everything else abnormally dry. I guess, I'm looking up in our area. I hadn't looked at it. It's kind of crazy. I'm Audrain County specifically. It's like they had boots on the ground. It's pretty, just talking to guys around here, the southern end, they caught some rains back over the past weekend and kind of missed it to the north. And, we've got a little bit of that yellow across central. But I guess to just give a quick, I've kind of touched on it here and there, but a lot of our corn up this way, it's right at tasseling or all the way to R2, almost R3 in some places. A lot of planes been rolling, through the area. I've kind of seen that across the whole central part of the state. Beans, fungicide really started on that in the past week. We'd held a lot of guys off, that had been to those stages earlier, but this, finally the growth stage and the calendar kind of lined up and pulled the trigger on a lot of that stuff here in the past week. We are fortunately, you mentioned some SDS, Garrett. We have not, that I'm aware of. I feel like somebody did say something to me about some sudden death, but I have not seen any. I don't think any of my folks have seen anything. That's one of those, things that as soon as people find it, they kind of share it to our group and all that. Fortunately, also have not. None of our folks have found any red crown rot. I know they're watching for it. I did pull that map up. I have not talked to any of the folks up there that have had it in the past, but it looks like there is some new stuff for 2026 confirmed up in Marion County. So that's where you get up around Hannibal, Palmyra, and Missouri. And then Pike County, Missouri, I believe. They did not have one in Pike County, Illinois, which is surprising to me because that's, if I read the map right, at least new for this year. But there again, it's been kind of the epicenter, so it may be a little bit of reporting fatigue on that. They know what it is. But they did have it reported in Adams County, so that's where you get up around Quincy, showing up there. So it's on our radar, absolutely. That is one we want to, just because it is, once it becomes endemic, it does become an issue going forward, and we want to definitely know where it is, and so that we can try to manage around that. I guess the only other thing I throw out in soybeans right now, especially as you start finding sudden death, as you start finding maybe some of these other diseases, and we're probably one good rain event away from all that stuff kind of getting lit off. A lot of these diseases actually started earlier in the season, but it seems like the foliar symptoms will come on after we have some kind of a pretty substantial rain event this time of year. But as you're looking at those plants, dig some plants up, don't pull them, dig them up. I've kind of, that's something I beat on pretty hard in my presentation this past week at our training camp. And look for nematodes on there. Once your eyes kind of get adjusted to them, it's pretty surprising, how easy they are to find. Now if you're, like me and been doing this for several decades, you might need your readers to see them. But, it's not something you have to have a magnifying glass or anything to detect. A lot of times they will be heavier where you find those diseases. They definitely create another pathway for disease to enter the plant. So if you see those, make note of that. And it's also, the university lab will do free testing for growers across the state on at least a couple samples. So, if I found a hot spot and I wanted to kind of know what my number was, I'd pull a sample there and then maybe do a sample of the field as a whole. That's something we can help folks do. And a lot of time, I mean, we know that we've got them, and in most cases, we've got pretty substantial numbers. But actually, kind of pinpoint some of that down. It can. Some management practices are a little tougher than the others, and maybe not something you can do on every single field. So, knowing where your spots are, rather, and where to direct that, that energy, expense, time, whatever it is, may be helpful. So, with that, Landry and I were both presenters at our training camp this past week, but I know you guys were all group leaders and took folks around. I'm just thought we'd close with a few minutes of just maybe kind of what you saw there and some of the things that we were covering, and go from there.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I mean, they had several good stops there, that actually talking about some of the SCN management. I mean, Syngenta had a pretty good stop there that was kind of talking about ways we can manage that with, some of our different varieties, the traits, the PI88, 788 and peaking and some of those seed treatments that are going to be, have some efficacy towards managing those, your red crown rot, your SDS, which we are starting to see a little bit of some SDS show up here, but kind of like what Scott said, it's, we really haven't had the rain events to flush that up into the foliar growth to where you're going to see it yet. I mean, Rocky, what your thoughts too? I mean, I thought some of the best stuff probably was some of the PPO technologies that we've got coming out here in the next, few years down the road yet. But as far as the traits go,
the PPO demonstration was really neat. Seeing BASF and Valent working together there was fun. Seeing those guys rip each other. We had a bare ground study or a super early pre-emerge study, I guess is what I'll call it. 30, 45, 60 days out from planting. And it was just really impressive how you could pick out the strengths and weaknesses of each one of your products. Not just the longevity, looking at that long, but what they're strong and weak on it becomes really evident when you keep it like they kept it. And it was just really, really impressive to see the difference between those PPOs in the group 15, particularly, the soil residual there is just shockingly different. That was
the point there.
Report.
Yeah, and the point there was just to show that, guys are. I mean, and I get it. I mean, I've got people that chase me off the farm if I'm talking to them about a PPO, right at planting, because we've had issues with it in the past. But the point of that was to show that putting it out early, you're not losing it all, especially early in the season when it's cooler. So when we're getting a flush in the end of March that we end up fighting through sometimes the season, if we just never can get them killed, those early ones, having those products out early does help with that. But it's also early enough that, you're going to get a rain on it and mitigate the risk of affecting your seed. It's not, we've had issues in the past, but a lot of times it was looking at beans to see if they were cracking through or not. No, they're not. Okay. And then they get sprayed and then it rains 3 days later. That's a lot different than laying something out really early and you're not planting for another month. So what the suggestion wasn't even necessarily, I know they pointed this out, it was the 60-day thing, but it wasn't saying that needed to be the date. It was just showing even that far out, we were still seeing positives. And it was really impressive about a month ago, especially month and a half ago back, when you would have already just been starting to do some posting and everything. So, yeah. What about you, Garrett?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for the results on everything. We've got a lot of cool stuff out there. I mean, there's a lot to learn in the biological landscape. We've got a lot of stress mitigators out there to look at. The Landry's warm season grass situation over there was interesting. Just seeing how the effect it can have on a hard pan and stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, I heard a lot of comments about Landry's stop too. Yeah, I love presenting, but boy, you end up missing going around and seeing all that stuff. Landry, just give her real quick. Maybe we'll close this way. Kind of what you were seeing over there, just to let everybody know. Our site this year or the last few years has been east of Columbia. So if you've ever been down I-70 and you see Wise Brothers there and equipment, the farms on both sides of the road, we're on the south side of the interstate right there. So it's very much still the old prairie, the clay pan. Pretty, it's you can end up with a pretty tough hard pan, underneath there. And then you've had your study now going on for what, 3-4 years, Landry?
Yeah. We've got two, and I should say it wasn't just me at that stop. We had our conservation grazing specialist, Cheston Stacy, and our kind of row crop conservation specialist, Joe Zellner. So those guys had a huge hand in that stop as well. We've had this stop for 3 years, or at least had that site there for 3 years for native grass. So we were kind of comparing a 3 and 2 year old native grass planting. And like you mentioned, with moving sites, there was no need to keep that site there and pristine like we had it. So we gave us the ability to do some pits and soil pits and dig up kind of to look at soil penetration. And I'll be honest with you, that was kind of the first time in that soil condition with that heavy clay pan at 12, 15, 18 inches starting to be able to look at that stuff. And I was extremely surprised at how deep those roots, even on our 3-year-old stand, and even 2, maybe not to the degree and the abundance of roots for that 2-year-old stand that penetrated down to that clay pan, but like the 3-year-old stand, it was, that soil pit was not super deep. It was probably maybe 3 foot deep or so, but again, that clay pan started at about 12 to 15 inches from the surface, and we had roots all the way to the bottom of that soil pit. In that 3-year-old stand. And what was kind of really neat, which just happened by stance, is that we had dug some pits 2 or 3 weeks ago to make sure that we were going to be able to see what we thought we could see or be able, and obviously knowing that we were going to have to dig some pits closer to the time of our training camp. Those old pits we left open, and they filled up with water with all the rain we've had. And the 2-year-old pit versus the 3-year-old pit was like almost dry. And these sites were, the pits were 20 feet apart from each other. So it's not like it's a different soil profile, a different landscape, different topography. It was all pretty very similar. But that 2-year-old pit had water almost to the top. And the 3-year-old pit had about 6 inches of water in the bottom of it. And I think that's, I even talked to some of our NRCS guys, soil health guys, to kind of pick their brain, because it was just night and day difference. And I think those roots just started, penetrating that much deeper. They were able to help infiltrate water down vertically, because a lot of times that water goes through that top 12 inches, hits that clay pan, and then moves horizontally across the landscape, right? It's not necessarily penetrating down. And that 3-year-old stand had the ability to allow that water to maybe percolate down through that clay pan a little better than the 2-year-old stand, because the corn and soybeans were pretty similar as far as the old pits with water in them as the 2-year-old stand that made grass. So yeah, it was really cool. I hope everybody enjoyed it. It was kind of just something different. I think just gets people thinking a little bit outside of the normal row crop agronomy type stuff. And yeah.
So was the take home from that? Obviously you've talked about warm season grasses, basically, obviously allowing forage at a time when everything else is shutting down, and even what that's allowed, maybe, with some fall calving and some other things. But was the take home, I guess, that on top of that, if you're able to do this and maybe even a rotational type pattern, rejuvenating, is that what are we?
Yeah, no, we don't necessarily coming from, obviously a perennial forage in a row crop situations is not feasible. And we get that, we kind of said that in our talk, that our focus or our goal was a couple things. One, to make think about one of the soil health principles is having a continuous living root, right? And we're only in a corn bean soy rotation, we've got living roots out there for about 4 months out of the year. So having something that is going to help, especially if we can get some tap rooted type plants, something that might help get into that soil panel or that clay pan a little better than just our annual row crops. So kind of, we were just getting people to kind of think about that from that standpoint. The other thing that we probably didn't talk about is enough in that stuff that is, especially in that sort of, with those soil properties, how that water moves horizontally after it reaches below, to that clay pan, is that even those native grasses as a buffer on the edges of those fields, capturing some of that nutrients and some of that maybe potential herbicide that's connected with that water as it moves horizontally across the field and off into potential drain. From a conservation standpoint, that's a huge thing as well, right? If we just got fescue bound sod that's 12 inches deep, we're not getting below that clay pan to help infiltrate some of that water that might be moving horizontally across it. So yeah, there's just a couple things. And like I said, and just we've had that site for a couple years. We've had a stop there, I think 2 out of the 3 years, and it was just kind of to wrap everything up that we've learned over the 2 or 3 years in that native grass study.
How big is that area, Landry?
The native grass plots,
Mm-hmm.
they're not very big. I would say they're 50 by 100 maybe, or something like that.
Would just be I think we're looking at, you do trials enough, and you got to move these sites around a little bit, just because you start as you're trialing something from this year, you have to take into effect what was done the previous years, and eventually you end up with a lot of layers. And I think we are looking at a different site in the same neighborhood next year. It will be interesting though, as that returns to just normal a row crop situation, if that area, kind of what that shows up in the future, even though we're not necessarily trialing anything, if you see something on a yield monitor or anything like that.
Yeah. And that's what Matt was saying out there, Weiss, is that, he's, it would be kind of cool to.
Oh yeah.
Keep that area.
Yeah.
Yeah. Keep that area in mind. So when they're running over it with a yield monitor, combine or something, they can kind of see if that changes anything.
Yeah. No, it'd be interesting. Yeah. Well, guys, you got anything else? We kind of probably went a little bit on the long side this week, but it's been a few weeks since we all met, so a lot to talk about. Well, appreciate everybody that's listening. Like I say, we always kind of say this: if you have any ideas, things you'd like discussed. Also, a lot of the things just that we mentioned in our trials, some of that stuff has come from, things that folks have mentioned, that they'd like to see. That's really kind of where, like, for example, that PPO study, looking at the pre's came from. You have ideas like that you'd like to. I have ideas, but I don't necessarily have we've got the folks who can put that together in a way that turns kind of an idea into more of an academic trial that really can zero in on the things that matter in that particular study, if you will. So yeah, if you have ideas or things you'd like to, maybe you played with on the farm and you'd like to see it thrown into kind of more of a research setting, let us know about those things. We're wanting to make it as practical as possible for our folks, and also I know we're gonna have several growers walking through these things too over the next week or two, that have shown some interest in seeing this stuff. So let us know that. With that, appreciate everybody tuning in, and we'll talk to you again here in 2-3 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Made for Agriculture, brought to you by MFA, your whole farm solution.